Let's get into these hands. The first hand happens pretty much, I think, within the first couple of hands of this game opening. There is a limp under the gun from an older Asian guy. I don't really know anything about him. I don't think I've ever played with him. I now look down at ace-king offsuit. I make it 25. There is a call on the button from a kind of nitty short stacking player who I have a lot of hours with. And now the limper calls as well. We go 3 ways to a flop, which comes ace, 10, 8, rainbow. The under the gun limper checks. There's a couple of draws here, obviously. We have queen jack for a double gutter. Jack 9 is an open ender. I expect, 1 or 2 of these guys to have an ace. And so I think I could be sizing up. I bet 50. Maybe I should be betting 45. The type player on the button folds, and now the limper calls. When he calls, I think he's going to have, obviously, a fair amount of aces. Maybe some 10s, like 10 jack, 10 9, king 10. Calling to see once to see what happens. The turn is now a 10. He checks. I decide to check it back. I'm in position. Obviously, if he leads the river, I can decide if I want to be raising for value, depending on sizing. I could just call. And if he checks the river, now I can bet for value and possibly get looked up light. So I check it back. The river is now an offsuit king. So I end up making top 2. And he now goes for betting chips. And after a little bit of time, bets $60. Obviously, a pretty small bet. I'm never folding. And now the question is whether I should be raising for value. I don't really know much about this guy. I think if I am raising for value, it obviously has to be small. I don't think we want to go large because then we really can't be getting called by worse. The one hand that I'm really trying to target here is specifically a worse ace, obviously. Worse aces are now going to think that we're chopping, and so they might be calling. So I think if we're going to raise, we have to raise small, probably something less than 3x. So maybe making it 160, something like that as far as sizing. I think about it for a while, and he's got like 300 left. So I think if I raise small and he jams, I have to fold, but I'd like puke and hate the sizing. And I just decide that, if I am raising, I'm not sure a worse ace is going to call. I end up just calling, and I think he says ace. He shows a 9. But obviously once I see a 9, I know that I have the best hand, assuming he doesn't have a 10, but he only shows a 9 at first. And so I table my hand. Like I said, I think he said ace, so I assume it to be ace 9. If he didn't say ace, maybe he just had a missed draw. Assuming he had ace 9, obviously we missed some value. I think raising like 100 is perfect because the pot's just so big. Stubborn aces are just always going to call. So I think this is a mistake. I think this is an easy slam dunk spot. After I tank for a while, just make it like 100 more. And if he jams, you just have to fold. People aren't going to be jamming worse. And I think that a lot of times, like, an ace is going to call thinking that it's going to be chopping. Sometimes they think, like, because they bet so small, I'm bluffing. And so, like I said numerous times in videos, these spots are kind of slam dunk value spots that I should be raising for value. In this exact spot, I didn't really know my opponent. I thought, obviously, he could be betting a 10, maybe some queen jack straights. And so I decided to just call. Considering that he had a 9, maybe he did have jack 9 or 9-7 for a straight draw. But like I said, I think he said he had an ace. So we ended up scooping that pot, and I think I did miss about $100 of value. In this next hand, I pick up pocket 10s under the gun and open to $20. I get a couple of calls, the blinds call, and we end up going 5 ways to a flop, which comes king, king, 5 with 2 hearts. The big blind checks. I think I have 3 people to act behind me. We are 5 ways to this flop. And so I think betting here is suicide. Obviously, we're going to really know if I'm getting called by a king, a hard draw, some pocket pairs. So I check, and now everyone behind me checks as well. The turn is an offsuit 6. Now the big blind bets 45 into 100. I think he could be doing this fairly wide. He could be doing it with some 6s, some pocket pairs, like maybe 7s, 8s, or 9s. Obviously, if he has a king, he could be doing this as well. But I think if he has a king, he'd probably be betting a little bit larger since there is a flush draw. I call, and everybody behind me folds. Obviously, at this point, I'm hoping that the river goes check, check, and I can get to showdown. The river is a 6, and so the final board is king, king, 5, 6, 6. Any king makes a full house. The flush draw did miss. And now he goes and bets 85 fairly quickly. Pretty gross spot. I think this obviously looks like a value bet, but the pot is now fairly large. I think I'm getting like 3.5 to 1, if my math is quickly right, something like that. So I don't have to be right that often, as I mentioned in previous videos. I think that obviously he could be missing, betting some missed flush draws here, some missed straight draws, 7, 8. I think that if he had a king, he should be betting larger on the turn with the field yet to act. So after some thought, I don't really know this guy. I decided to call, pay him off. I am getting good odds. I don't have to be right that often. And we get showed king 10. I think maybe we could fold to this turn with 3 people still to act. This guy is betting into the field, so he should have a fairly strong hand. Once I call turn, do I have to call the river? Possibly not. The math of it dictates that I don't have to be right that often. And, we do beat a lot of hands. I think if he sizes up a little bit larger, then it's an easier fold. But for that sizing, I decided to pay it off. Put in the comments down below what you think here, if you think this is a bad payoff or not. Anyway, thankfully, obviously, the turn wasn't a 10 because that would have been pretty nasty, as we probably going to double them up for much more if that were the case. This next one is a doozy, and not one that I'm particularly proud of. There is a limp from the nitty player. Now the ace-9 off guy from the previous hand makes it 15. I have king-queen off. This is a spot I'd generally be 3-betting, but because of the nitty limper, I don't really love it. I think that the nitty limper obviously could have some big hands here. Maybe it's still best to 3-bet and, get rid of him, define his range if he calls, or 4-bets, it's an easy fold. Anyway, I call, and there's a couple other callers. The limper, the nitty limper calls as well. We go 5 ways to a flop, which comes 6-5 deuce with 2 spades. Goes check, check. The opener checks. Obviously, I think this is a board that's just going to whiff a ton of people. And so my immediate thought is, if I bet here, I'm just going to get a lot of folds. I bet 45, and sure enough, the whole field folds, except the pre-flop opener. He ends up calling. When he calls here, obviously, I think he could have some flush draws, although I expect that if he had a flush draw, he'd probably just bet this flop. Obviously, he could have some overpairs, 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, any of the overpairs, really. I think this is kind of a scary board 5 ways that he might be just check calling. I don't have a spade in my hand, which is one of the reasons I don't really love betting this flop exactly, because obviously there are going to be some hands that are going to flop spade draws and they're just never folding. So anyway, he calls. The turn is now an offsuit 9, and 7-8 gets there. He checks. Obviously, I'm going to keep barreling. I'm trying to get him to fold an overpair. I bet 110, and he kind of quickly goes to his chips shakily. He has, I think, 500 left, 450, something like that, and he calls fairly quickly. At this point, I'm kind of thinking I'm done with the hand. Obviously, again, I think his hand is mostly going to be overpairs and going to be the flush draws. The river is now the 8 of spades, and he goes in the tank for a little bit and checks. Obviously, I'm at the bottom of my range. This is actually a good bluff card if he does, in fact, have overpairs. And so not having a spade in my hands isn't great because now he could have the flush draw. But I would expect that if he had a flush draw, he should be just leading this river, right? When I bet flop and bet turn, I'm going to have a lot of hands like 2 pairs, sets, maybe some overpairs. This is just going to be an awful board for. I shouldn't be betting unless I have a flush and he has the nut flush. I don't think that I need to be betting that large to be getting folds from overpairs. And so eventually I just decide that I'm going to be trying to get folds from the 1 pair hands. This is obviously a pretty scary board. The pot, I think, is 385, 400, something like that. And so I bet 220, a little more than half pot. And fairly quickly, he jams all in for 200 more. Womp womp. Yeah, obviously, need a fold. Don't have anything, king high. But I just really don't like the way I played this hand. 5 ways. There's no reason for me to get spewy here. I'm trying to outplay everybody thinking, oh, okay, nobody has anything. But that just doesn't mean that I have carte blanche to just lose my mind here with king, queen high, no pair, no draw, and try to run over the entire table 5-handed. It's just a really silly play. I think that it's just much better to be obviously doing with equity. In my mind at the time, I was thinking I have king, queen high. I could turn a king or a queen, but I don't have the king or a queen of spades. So it could be the king or a queen of spades. And now if somebody calls, they could have a flush draw. You just get into some really nasty spots. So I really don't like the way I played this hand. Obviously, I assume that when he check jams the river, he had exactly the nut flush draw. Kudos to him to trap me. Obviously, like I said, I think generally speaking, the value hands that I'm going to be betting on the flop and turn are just going to be hands that are checking back this river. So congratulations to him that I actually had an airball and he got maximum value out of me. But maybe he had it worse. Maybe he had a set. Maybe he was bluffing with the ace of spades. I don't know. Can't call. I lose, and I just hate the way I played that hand. It was really a catastrophe from beginning to end. Now we have 3 pretty spicy hands. There's a limp from the ace-9 guy. He's been playing a ton of hands, pretty much just limping his entire range. I have 10-8 off on the button. I decided to limp, trying to get to a pot, play pots in position against a bunch of people who are deep. Now the small blind makes it 35. He's been isolating a few times in these situations. The limper folds, and it's time to battle. I'm in position. We're going to take this 10-8 off to the streets. So I call. We go heads up to a flop, which comes queen, 9, deuce, rainbow. I flop the second nut gut shot. He now bets 50, which is a pretty big bet. I feel like he's just kind of one and doneing it here. I decide to call in position, see what's going to happen. I think if he checks the turn, then obviously I can take it away from him. The turn is the king, so now 10 jack does get there. Obviously I have the 10 blocker, so I can start repping. He checks, and now I decide I'm going to just be blasting. I bet 110, and thankfully for me, he folds fairly quickly. So I think he's got a pretty wide range here, just like all pocket pairs, ace X's, just hands that he wants to open against limpers. Obviously, this is something that I do pretty frequently. Obviously, if you think people are weak and limping wide, then you want to be isolating. And so I think that, being in position, I was able to kind of take this hand to the streets and pick it off from him. So in this interesting hand of note, I'm in the small blind with Jack 9. There is an open to 20. Caller from like the action player who's playing every single hand. Obviously, still tilted, still trying to get in the mix. We will not be folding the Jack 9 from the small. I call, and the big blind calls as well. We go 4 ways to a flop, which comes ace Jack 9 with 2 spades, the Jack 9 of spades. I check, and it checks through, unfortunately. The turn is the deuce of spades. Obviously not my favorite card, but it's time to bet for value and to protect against the random spades, the king of spades, queen of spades. Obviously sometimes someone will have the ace of spades in check. So I bet 75 into 80, and now it folds to the button, who is the aforementioned action player, the one with the ace 9, the guy who's been mixing it up a ton. And so when he calls, obviously I think that he could have some flushes here. He could be checking those back on the flop and made a flush, but I think he's still fairly wide. Now I'm just obviously praying, Jack or 9 to seal the deal and make it an easy decision. And thankfully, we peel the sweet offsuit Jack on the river to make Jacks full. And kind of at this point, I start, immediately thinking okay, what could I be betting for value? And as I'm just beginning to think, he immediately starts checking out of turn, tapping on the glass and tapping the table fervently, saying, he's checking. And I'm like, what is he doing? And the dude was like, oh, he's waiting on you to act. I'm like, well, why is he checking out of turn? And the dealer just shrugs. So, as I'm thinking about what I should be betting here, my first thought immediately was obviously, okay, what can I be betting here? What hands am I targeting when I bet with the jacks full? What sizings do I want to go? If I think he has a flush, if I think he missed, should I be checking? And once he starts fervently checking out of turn, all of that kind of goes out the window. And I immediately think, he does in fact possibly have a flush and doesn't like that the river paired the board, or that he himself just has a generally big hand. It feels like if check 2 he might bet, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. I've seen numerous times in the past where people are kind of checking out of turn because they want to look weak, they want you to bet. Obviously, in this case, I do want to bet, but I don't think that's necessarily the case to assume that I can check and that he's going to bet my hand for me. I think he could have some small flushes that, are still trying to kind of get to showdown, a little bit of mix of both. So I don't really want to take the chance at checking and hoping that he bets it for me and get in a check raise. I think I just want to be bombing. I think that he is going to have a good hand, and I think that he's going to call. We've obviously already mixed it up a bunch, and that one time he got in that river check raise against me, so I think he's going to think I'm tilting. So I decided to just kind of bomb. After some thought, I bet 300. He goes into the tank for a little bit, maybe 30 seconds, but I already see him immediately grabbing his white chips, counting his chips, and it looks like he's already calling. I think he probably calls within 30 to 45 seconds this overbet. Obviously, I table my hand, and I am good. Can I get in a check raise? Can I bet bigger? I don't know. I don't know if I want to be getting too greedy. And something like I said, I think that when he calls this river bomb, he just always has a flush. And so the question is, if I check, does he bet it? Obviously it depends on how big his flush is, of course. Maybe a missed value if he has a king high flush or an ace high flush, because he's always going to bet that, and then I could get in the check raise, and I doubt he's ever folding. But I didn't really want to take that chance. I knew that he probably had a big hand, and I figured I'd go for the maximum value. So we got him back for my misplayed king queen from earlier. And now for the final hand of the session. I'm in the big blind with 10-8 off once again. There is an open to 15 from a player that, let's just say I don't necessarily think he's the best of the table. Folds to me. It's 10 more to call. He's got, I think, about 300. So I think for 10 more here against an opponent that I think is going to make some mistakes post-flop, I decided to call. Flop comes queen 10-3. I check, and he bets, I think, 15 or 20. Obviously, flopping second pair here. I'm not going to be folding just yet. I call. Turns an 8, so I make 2 pair, bottom 2 pair. I check. He bets, I think, 45 or 50 and has about 200 to 250 left. I don't remember. He had these awkward stacks where they were piled up a little high, and I decided to just go for all of it. I think that if he has a good hand here, king, queen, ace, queen, an overpair, he's just going to slam it in there. Obviously, he could have some draws like king, jack, ace, jack. So I slam it in there, and he pretty much snaps me off. The river's a jack, which which obviously I don't love, but I already tabled my hand once he snaps. And so when the river pills off the jack, he kind of looks back at his cards. I'm feeling pretty good that he hasn't tabled his hand yet. And eventually he tables that he has ace-queen for, calling off at the top on the turn. So yeah, obviously we get max value here. Got fairly lucky hitting the 5-outer, and kind of goes to show you. I mean, I think that his call off on the turn is probably a mistake. I can't imagine how many hands I'm going to just jam here. Maybe if I have like Jack 10, 10-9 for like a pair and a gutter, I might use those as bluffs. But yeah, I don't know, kind of an awkward spot for him. We end up stacking him, and that ends up being the final set hand of note. We end up winning $391. Obviously, could have did much better if I didn't spew off with the king queen. And that's, I mean, like I said, I think that's obviously a mistake. That's just a situation that I don't need to be getting into. Anyway, another decent session, booked a nice win, and had to leave to go get Charlie. So that's all for now, and we'll see you in the next video.